The ship was cold and dark and sat alone in a metal room with no windows. He could feel the engines humming beneath his feet, a deep vibration that told him they were moving very fast through space. 3 days ago, he had been teaching a survival class in the mountains of Korea. Now he was millions of kilometers from Earth, heading toward a planet designed to kill him. He thought about how strange life could be. One moment you are showing students how to build a fire with wet wood. The next moment, aliens are knocking on your door and telling you that you have been chosen to represent all of humanity in something called the Predator test. The selection had been random. Every human on Earth had their name entered into a global lottery, and somehow, through luck or fate or cruel cosmic humor's name had been pulled. The government tried to change it. They wanted to send a soldier, someone trained for combat, someone younger and stronger. But the Galactic Dominion refused. The rules were clear. The lottery chose the candidate, and the candidate must go. So here he was, a 34-year-old survival instructor with bad knees and a scar on his shoulder from a bear attack 7 years ago. Not a soldier, not a hero, just a man who had spent his life learning how to stay alive in places that wanted him dead. The door opened with a soft hiss, and a creature walked in. Had seen pictures of the Dominion species during his briefing, but seeing one in person was different. This one was called or at least that was the name the translation device gave him. It stood over 2 meters tall, with a body covered in dark shell-like plates and eyes that looked like black glass marbles, many of them arranged in a cluster on its head. "Human," the creature said. Its voice came through the translator as flat and emotionless. "We arrive at 7 in 6 hours. You will be given a standard survival pack, nothing more." Nodded slowly. "What's in the pack?" "Basic tools, water purification tablets, emergency flare, rope, knife." The paused. "Most candidates never open the pack. They die before they have the chance." "Most candidates," repeated. "All candidates," the corrected. "In 10,000 years of testing, no species has passed. The longest survival time was 71 hours. Your species will likely perform worse. You are soft. No claws, no armor, no venom. The predators of 7 will find you easy prey." Looked at the alien for a long moment. He had dealt with people like this before, people who looked at him and saw weakness. They saw a man of average height with a quiet voice and calm eyes, and they assumed he would break under pressure. They were always wrong. "Can I ask you something?" said. The tilted its head, a gesture that might have been curiosity. "Ask." "These predators on the planet, are they smart?" "Extremely. They are engineered for maximum hunting efficiency. They learn, adapt, and coordinate." "Good," said. "That makes it fair." They stared at him with those many black eyes, and for a moment, something that might have been confusion crossed its alien features. Then it turned and left the room without another word. Leaned back against the cold metal wall and closed his eyes. He thought about his life, about all the times he had almost died. The bear in the mountains, the snake bite in the jungle, the 11 days he spent lost in Siberia during the worst winter in 50 years, walking through snow so deep it reached his chest, eating tree bark and melted ice, refusing to give up even when his body screamed at him to stop. He had survived all of that. He would survive this too. 6 hours later, the ship descended through thick clouds and got his first look at 7. It was a world of dark forests and jagged mountains, of rivers that ran red with mineral deposits and skies that were always gray. Even from high above, he could see movement in the trees, shadows shifting and hunting. They brought him to the drop pod, a small metal sphere barely big enough to hold one person. The survival pack was already inside, strapped to the seat. Other aliens had gathered to watch, species he didn't recognize, with bodies of all shapes and sizes. They looked at him the way people look at animals in a zoo, with curiosity and a little bit of pity. One of them, a creature that looked like a tall bird with 4 arms, made a sound that the translator turned into laughter. 12 hours, it said to its companion. I bet 12 hours before something eats him. Too generous, the other replied. 8 hours, look at him, no natural weapons at all. Heard them but didn't react. He stepped into the pod and sat down, pulling the straps tight across his chest. They stood at the entrance, those black eyes watching him. The test lasts 7 rotations, it said. 1 rotation on 7 equals approximately 32 Earth hours. Survive all 7, and your species will be granted membership in the Galactic Dominion. Die, and your species will be classified as non-viable for galactic integration. And if I die, said, what happens to Earth? Nothing. You simply will not be permitted to join the greater galactic community. You will remain isolated on your small planet until you evolve into something more capable or until you destroy yourselves. They paused. Based on our observations of your species, we expect the latter. Smiled, a small and quiet expression that didn't reach his eyes. You don't know humans very well. We know enough. We have studied your history, your wars, your violence, your destruction of your own environment. You are an aggressive species, but aggression alone does not ensure survival. On 7, you will face creatures that are stronger, faster, and smarter than anything your world has produced. Your aggression will mean nothing. The pod door began to close. Through the narrowing gap held this gaze. There's something you don't understand about humans, he said. We're not aggressive because we're strong. We're aggressive because for 200,000 years everything on our planet tried to kill us, and we're still here. Every predator that hunted us is either dead or running scared. You think your engineered monsters are special? He shook his head slowly. They're just another thing that wants to eat me. I've been dealing with those my whole life. The door sealed shut, and the pod dropped. Felt the acceleration press him into his seat as the pod screamed through the atmosphere. Through the small window, he watched the gray clouds rush past, and then suddenly he was below them, falling toward an endless dark forest. The pod's thrusters fired at the last moment, slowing his descent, and he hit the ground hard enough to rattle his teeth. For a moment he just sat there, breathing. Then he unstrapped himself, grabbed the survival pack, and opened the pod door. The air hit him first, thick and warm and smelling of decay. The forest around him was dense, with trees that had trunks as wide as houses and leaves so dark they were almost black. Somewhere in the distance, something screamed, a high and terrible sound that echoed through the trees. Stepped out of the pod and onto the alien soil. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and began to walk. Above him, in the orbital station, they watched through surveillance cameras as the human moved into the forest. The betting pools were already closing. No one had wagered more than 15 hours. They remembered the human's eyes, that calm and steady gaze that held no fear. It had overseen 847 tests. It had watched thousands of candidates die screaming in the darkness of 7. For the first time in its long life, it felt something it could not name, something that might have been doubt. The human disappeared into the trees, and the hunt began. The first night on 7 was the longest of his life. He found a hollow beneath a fallen tree and crawled inside, covering the entrance with branches and dead leaves. The darkness was complete, so thick he couldn't see his own hands. All around him, the forest was alive with sounds, clicking and growling, and the soft pad of footsteps circling his hiding spot. Something sniffed at the entrance to his hollow. He could hear its breathing, slow and deep, and smell its breath like rotting meat and copper. He held his knife in one hand and didn't move, didn't even breathe for what felt like hours. Eventually, the thing moved away and allowed himself to exhale. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the darkness and listened and learned. By morning, he had identified at least 4 different types of predators by their sounds alone. One clicked when it walked, which meant it probably had hard legs or claws. One breathed in a strange pattern, 3 short breaths followed by one long one, which suggested it relied heavily on smell. One moved through the trees above him, branches creaking under its weight, and one made no sound at all, which was the most dangerous of all. when the gray light of dawn filtered through the leaves, crawled out of his hollow and began to move. He needed water, shelter, and information. The survival pack had given him tools, but tools were useless without knowledge. He needed to understand this world, its rhythms, its dangers, its weaknesses. He found a stream within the first hour, water running clear and cold over smooth stones. He tested it with the purification tablets from his pack, then drank deeply. As he filled his water container, he noticed tracks in the mud beside the stream. Six-legged tracks, deep and heavy, leading toward a dense thicket of thorny bushes. Followed the tracks, moving slowly and carefully. His survival instructor's mind was already working, analyzing what he saw. The tracks were fresh, made within the last few hours. The creature was heavy, probably 3 or 4 times his weight. It walked with a slight drag on its back left leg, which might mean an old injury or a natural weakness. He found the creature an hour later. It was lying in a clearing, resting in a patch of pale sunlight. The briefing materials had called it a pack hunter engineered for speed and coordination. This one was alone, which was unusual. It had 6 legs, a long body covered in gray-green scales, and a head dominated by a massive jaw filled with teeth like curved knives. Watched it from behind a tree, barely breathing. The eyes were closed, but its ears, tall and pointed like a bat's, twitched constantly, tracking every sound in the forest. It was resting, not sleeping. It was aware. He could have left. He could have circled around and continued on his way, avoiding conflict. That's what every other candidate had done. They ran and hid and tried to survive by not being seen. But was not other candidates. He had learned something important in his years of survival training. Running made you prey. The moment you started running, you told every predator in the area that you were food. But if you stood your ground, if you showed that you were dangerous, predators would think twice. They didn't want to fight. They wanted an easy meal. Studied for another hour, noting its habits, its blind spots, the way it favored its right side when it moved. Then he began to plan. The trap took most of the day to build. He found a narrow ravine with steep walls, perfect for funneling a large creature into a confined space. He gathered vines from the forest, tough and fibrous, and wove them into a snare. He sharpened a fallen branch into a spear. The point hardened in a small fire he built and quickly extinguished. He positioned the emergency flare from his pack at the ravine's entrance, rigged to ignite when the snare was triggered. Then he waited. They found him at dusk. He had left a trail of small wounds on his arm, letting the blood drip onto leaves and stones, creating a scent trail that any predator could follow. He stood at the far end of the ravine, knife in one hand, spear in the other, and watched the creature approach. It was bigger than he had realized. Standing upright, it would have been twice his height. Its scales caught the fatting light, and its eyes, yellow and slitted like a snake's, fixed on him with terrible hunger. "Come on," whispered, "come and get me." The charged. It was fast, faster than anything had ever seen. It covered the distance between them in seconds, its 6 legs churning the ground, its jaws opening wide. But it was running in a straight line, following the path had cleared, heading directly into the trap. The snare caught its front legs, tangling them together. The creature stumbled, and its momentum carried it forward, directly into the trigger. The emergency flare ignited with a blinding flash, directly in the face. The creature screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and thrashed wildly. Was already moving. He ran forward, staying low, and drove his spear into the soft spot beneath this jaw. The creature's thrashing intensified but held on, pushing the spear deeper until he felt it pierce something vital. Hot blood poured over his hands, black in the dim light. The collapsed, its legs twitched twice, then went still. Stood over the body, breathing hard, covered in alien blood. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something else, something he hadn't felt in years. The thrill of victory, the ancient satisfaction of the hunt. In the orbital station above, Alarms were sounding. They stood before a wall of screens, watching the footage of the humans standing over the dead. Around it, other Dominion officials were talking rapidly, their translator devices struggling to keep up with the chaos. "That's impossible," one of them said. "No candidate has ever killed they're pack hunters. They don't attack alone." "This one was alone," they replied quietly, "and now it's dead." The human observer stood in the corner of the room, watching the screens with an expression that might have been pride. She had recommended for this mission after reading his survival memoir, a book about all the times he had almost died and hadn't. The selection committee had dismissed her recommendation, but then the lottery had chosen him anyway. Fate, she thought, or something like it. On the screen was doing something strange. He had pulled out his knife and was cutting into this body, removing its hide with careful, practiced movements. "What is he doing?" demanded one of the officials. "Adapting," said. "He's going to use the hide for protection, maybe camouflage. The scales will help mask his scent and regulate his body temperature." The officials stared at her with expressions of disbelief and growing concern. "Your species does this?" one asked. "You kill predators and wear their skin." Smiled a small and dangerous expression. "We've been doing it for 200,000 years. It's how we survived our own planet. Everything there tried to kill us too." On the planet below, finished skinning and wrapped the hide around his shoulders like a cloak. The blood was already drying and the scales felt rough against his skin. He was tired, hungry, and still had 6 more rotations to survive. But for the first time since landing on 7, he felt something like confidence. The predators of this world were dangerous, yes. They were fast and strong and designed to kill, but they weren't special. They were just animals, following their instincts, hunting the way they had been engineered to hunt. Had been hunting all his life, and he was very, very good at it. He found a defensible position on a rocky outcrop overlooking the forest and built a fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the trees around him, and in those shadows he could see eyes watching him. Yellow eyes, red eyes, eyes that glowed in the darkness like distant stars. The predators were watching, they were learning. Good thought, let them learn. Let them see what happens when they come for me. He sat by his fire, wrapped in the skin of his first kill, and waited for the next hunt to begin. Above him in the orbital station, the betting pools had frozen. No one knew what to wager anymore. For the first time in 10,000 years, the odds had shifted. The human was still alive, and he was hunting back. By the 4th rotation had changed. The man who had stepped off the drop pod was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. His face was leaner, marked with dirt and dried blood. His eyes had developed the constant scanning movement of a predator, always watching, always alert. The hide hung from his shoulders like a trophy, and his belt now held 3 knives instead of 1, each taken from the bones and teeth of creatures he had killed. He had learned the rhythm of 7. He knew which areas to avoid at night, where the water sources were, which plants were edible, and which would kill him in seconds. He had built traps throughout his territory, a network of snares and pitfalls and deadfalls that any creature would have to pass through to reach him. The predators had learned to avoid these areas. But the Dominion had been watching, and they were not pleased. In the orbital station, the High Council had convened an emergency session. The screens showed moving through the forest with the quiet confidence of something that belonged there. He was no longer running, no longer hiding. He was patrolling, checking his traps, hunting for food with the casual ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "This is unacceptable," said one of the council members, a tall creature covered in purple feathers. "The test is meant to measure survival capability, not hunting prowess. He is making a mockery of our traditions." "He is surviving," they replied. "That is what the test requires." He has killed 7 predators in 4 rotations. 7. No candidate has ever killed more than 1, and most die without killing any. This human is not surviving, he is conquering. The council fell silent. On the screens had stopped at one of his traps. Something had triggered it during the night, a small creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a dog. He examined it carefully, then killed it with a quick strike of his knife. Efficient, emotionless, professional. Release the, one council member said quietly. The turned to look at them. That has not been used in over 300 years. It was designed to end tests quickly, not to be a fair challenge. The human has proven that fair challenges are not enough. Release the. Let us see if his confidence survives meeting a true apex predator. The council voted. The decision was unanimous. Saw the creature descend from the sky on the morning of the 5th day. It came from the clouds like a nightmare-given form, wings spanning at least 10 meters, a body covered in scales that shimmered between black and dark purple. Its eyes were orange and burned with an intelligence that the other predators lacked. This was not a simple hunter. This was something more. He knew immediately that this was different. The other creatures on 7 hunted by instinct, following patterns that could be predicted and exploited. But the watched him from above with calculating patience, circling slowly, studying him the way he had studied thee on his first day. It knew he was dangerous. It was being careful. Good thought, careful creatures make mistakes. He retreated to the base of a cliff face where he had established one of his secondary camps. The cliff provided protection from above, and the terrain was rocky and uneven, difficult for a flying creature to navigate. He had chosen this location specifically for situations like this, a defensive position where his disadvantages were minimized. They landed on a rock formation about 50 meters away. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its talons were as long as his forearm, curved and black, dripping with something that sizzled when it hit the stone. Venom, probably. One scratch would likely be fatal. "You're smart," said quietly, more to himself than to the creature. But smart isn't enough. He had spent the previous night preparing for this moment, though he hadn't known it would come so soon. The hide he wore masked most of his heat signature, something he had discovered when other predators walked right past him in the darkness. The hunted by heat, he could tell from the way it tilted its head, the specialized sensors along its jaw. If he could mask his heat completely, he could become invisible to it. But invisible wasn't enough. He needed to kill it. The cliff face behind him rose nearly 100 meters into the gray sky. Halfway up, a thermal vent released steam into the air, creating a constant plume of heat that would blind the thermal senses. If he could reach that vent, if he could position himself above it, he might have a chance. Began to climb. The watched him go, its orange eyes tracking his movement. It didn't attack immediately, which confirmed his theory. It was waiting for him to expose himself, to move away from the protective cliff face into open ground. It didn't understand that he wasn't running away. He was setting a trap. The climb took over an hour. The rock was rough and offered plenty of handholds, but one slip would mean death. Focused on each movement, each grip, blocking out everything except the next meter of stone. Below him, the had begun to circle again, rising higher as he climbed, maintaining its distance but never looking away. He reached the thermal vent as the sun began to set. The steam was hot enough to burn, but he positioned himself just above it, where the heat would wash over him and blend his signature with the vent's output. Then he waited. The made its move at dusk. It came in fast and silent, dropping from above with its talons extended, aiming for the heat signature it had been tracking. But the heat signature was wrong, diffused by the vent, scattered across the rock face. The creature adjusted mid-flight, confused, its targeting systems overwhelmed. Jumped. He had timed it perfectly, the result of hours of observation and calculation. He landed on this back as it passed beneath him, his knife already in his hand. The creature screamed and banked hard, trying to throw him off, but had wrapped the hide around his arm and used it to grip the scales. He held on with strength born of desperation and drove his knife into the base of the creature's skull. The blade scraped against bone. The thrashed violently, spinning in the air, diving toward the ground. Pulled the knife out and struck again, harder, aiming for the soft spot between the scales. This time the blade sank deep. The creature's wings locked. They plummeted together, human and monster, falling toward the river that ran along the base of the cliff. Had just enough time to take a breath before they hit the water. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Cold water closed over his head, dark and rushing, full of stones and debris. He lost his grip on the and tumbled through the current, bouncing off rocks, fighting to find the surface. His lungs burned. His vision was going dark. Then his head broke the water and he gasped, sucking in air, grabbing at anything solid. His fingers found a root growing from the riverbank and he held on, pulling himself out of the current inch by inch until he collapsed on the muddy shore. The body floated past him a moment later, carried by the river, its wings spread wide and lifeless. His knife was still embedded in its skull. Lay on the bank for a long time, breathing, staring up at the gray sky. Every part of his body hurt. His arm was burned from the thermal vent. His ribs might be cracked from the impact. But he was alive, and the creature that was supposed to kill him was dead. In the orbital station, no one spoke. The council members stared at the screens in silence, watching the human lie on the riverbank beside the corpse of their ultimate predator. The stood apart from them, its many eyes fixed on the image. "This changes nothing," one of the council members said finally, but its voice was uncertain. The didn't respond. It was remembering something the human had said before the test began. "You think your engineered monsters are special. They're just another thing that wants to eat me." For 10,000 years, the Dominion had believed that the predator test measured a species' worth. Strong species survived. Weak species died. It was simple and clean and had served them well. But watching this human pull himself to his feet, retrieve his knife from the skull of their greatest weapon, and begin walking back toward his camp, they understood something new. They had not been measuring worth. They had been measuring danger. And humans, it seemed, were very dangerous indeed. That night built his fire larger than ever before. He roasted meat over the flames and ate until he was full for the first time since arriving on 7. Around him, the forest was quiet. No eyes watched from the shadows. No predators circled his camp. The word had spread. The human was not prey. The human was something else entirely. The morning of the 6th rotation brought rain, a cold and constant downpour that turned the forest floor to mud and filled the air with the smell of wet earth. Moved through the trees slowly, checking his traps, gathering food, always watching. The rain made it harder to hear approaching predators, harder to see movement in the shadows. He had to be extra careful. He found the creature near the river, lying in a hollow between two fallen trees. At first he thought it was dead. It was a young, much smaller than the one he had killed on his first day, and its gray-green scales were dull and lifeless. Blood seeped from a wound on its side, mixing with the rain and running into the mud. Approached carefully, his knife ready. A wounded predator was often more dangerous than a healthy one, but as he got closer, he saw that the creature wasn't preparing to attack. It was watching him with eyes that held something he hadn't expected to see. Fear. The young was afraid of him. He crouched beside the creature and examined its wound. Something had bitten it, another predator probably, maybe a territorial dispute or a failed hunt. The wound was deep but clean and the bleeding had mostly stopped. With proper care, the creature could survive. Every survival instinct possessed told him to walk away. This thing was a predator, one of the creatures designed to kill him. Helping it would use precious resources, food and water and time. It would slow him down and make him vulnerable. The smart thing to do was to leave it here to die or to kill it quickly and take its meat. He remembered his grandmother, a woman who had lived through war and famine and had taught him everything he knew about surviving. She used to say that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about staying human. If you survive by becoming a monster, she had told him once, you haven't really survived at all. Put away his knife and opened his survival pack. The young watched him with those fearful eyes as he cleaned the wound with purified water. It flinched when he applied pressure to stop the remaining bleeding, but it didn't try to bite him. It seemed to understand, somehow, that he was trying to help. "Easy," murmured, his voice soft and calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." He tore strips from his undershirt and used them as bandages, wrapping them around the creature's torso as best he could. The scales made it difficult, but he managed to secure them well enough. Then he sat back and looked at his patient. "You're going to need food," he said. "Stay here, I'll be back." He spent the next 2 hours hunting, moving through the rain-soaked forest with the quiet efficiency he had developed over the past week. He caught 3 of the small spider-dog creatures and brought them back to the hollow. The young ate them eagerly, its strength already returning. That night something strange happened. Built his fire as usual in a sheltered spot near the hollow where the young rested. He expected the creature to leave once it recovered, to return to its pack or find its own territory. Instead, it moved closer to the fire, settling down on the opposite side of the flames, and went to sleep. In the orbital station, the Dominion officials were arguing again. "He's domesticating it," one of them said, disbelief clear in its translated voice. "That's a Class 7 predator, engineered for maximum lethality, and he's treating it like a pet." "The test doesn't forbid cooperation with native fauna," they pointed out. "Because no one ever thought anyone would try it. The creatures of 7 are designed to kill, not to befriend." Watched the screens with quiet fascination. Was asleep now, lying by the fire with the hide wrapped around him for warmth. Across from him, the young was also sleeping, its breathing slow and steady. "You don't understand humans," she said softly. The officials turned to look at her. "Explain," they said. "Humans are social creatures. We form bonds, connections, relationships. It's how we survived on our planet. We weren't the strongest or the fastest, so we learned to work together to cooperate. We domesticated wolves and turned them into dogs. We took wild cats and made them into companions. We formed alliances with other species because together we were stronger than apart." She gestured at the screen, at the sleeping human and the sleeping predator. "He's not making a pet, he's making an ally." The next morning, woke to find the young standing guard at the edge of his camp. It had positioned itself between the fire and the forest, watching the trees with alert ears and ready muscles. When stirred, it turned to look at him, and he could have sworn he saw something like recognition in its eyes. "I guess you're staying," he said. The creature made a soft clicking sound, almost like a greeting. Named it after a dog he had owned as a child. It seemed appropriate somehow, this new companion that watched him with loyal eyes and followed at his heels as he moved through the forest. Learned quickly, understanding hand signals within days, helping to track prey and warn of approaching danger. The other predators noticed the change. A human alone was strange enough, but a human traveling with it was something they had never seen before. They watched from a distance, uncertain, their instincts confused by this impossible partnership. The council watched too, with growing concern. "This has gone far enough," one of them declared at an emergency meeting on the 6th rotation. "The human has corrupted the test. He has turned our predators against themselves." "He has done nothing forbidden," they replied. "He has made a mockery of our traditions. The predator test is meant to measure a species' ability to survive alone without assistance. By forming this alliance, he has cheated." "Show me where in the rules it says candidates cannot form alliances with native species." Silence. The rules had never anticipated this scenario because no candidate had ever survived long enough to attempt it. "We cannot allow this to continue," another council member said. "If he passes the test like this, every species will demand the right to attempt the same strategy. The entire system will collapse." "Then perhaps the system needs to collapse," they said quietly. Every eye in the room turned to it. "For 10,000 years, we have tested species by throwing them into a death world and watching them die. We told ourselves we were measuring their worth, their capability, their potential, but all we were really measuring was their capacity for violence." They paused, its many eyes reflecting the image on the screen. "This human has shown us something different. He has shown us that survival is not just about killing. It is about adapting, learning, forming connections. He has shown us that the strongest creature is not always the one with the sharpest claws." The council fell silent. On the screen and moved through the forest together, the human and the predator, predator and companion. They stopped by a stream and knelt to fill his water container while stood watch, ears rotating to catch every sound. "He still has one rotation remaining," a council member said finally. "The test is not over." "No," they agreed, "it is not." The council voted again that night. They voted to extend the test to 10 rotations. They voted to release additional predators, creatures that had never been used before, monsters held in reserve for situations exactly like this. But they also voted, quietly and without public announcement, to prepare a contingency. If the humans somehow survived the extended test, they would release the final option. The creature that had been engineered 10,000 years ago as a guarantee that no candidate could ever truly win. The creature called a Al knew none of this. He sat by his fire that night, scratching behind the ears where the scales were softest, and watched the stars through a break in the clouds. Somewhere up there, the Dominion was watching him. He could feel their eyes, their attention, their fear. "They're going to try something," he told. "They're not going to let us win without a fight." Made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and pressed closer to his side. "That's okay," said. "We'll be ready." He closed his eyes and let sleep take him, his hand resting on warm scales. Above them, the orbital station hummed with activity, preparing the next challenge. The hunt was about to begin again. The drop pods fell from the sky on the morning of rotation 7, screaming through the atmosphere like metal meteors. Counted 12 of them, each one containing a new predator, a new challenge designed to end his life. He watched them land across the forest, creating columns of smoke and fire that rose into the gray sky. Pressed against his leg, a low growl rumbling in its throat. "I know," said quietly, "they're not playing fair anymore." He spent the next 2 days in constant motion, avoiding the new predators, observing their patterns, learning their weaknesses. Some were fast, some were strong, some hunted in pairs with coordination that seemed almost telepathic. He killed 3 of them in those 2 days, using his traps, his knowledge, his partnership with. But there were always more, always another threat emerging from the forest. The council had made their message clear. They would keep sending predators until he died. On the morning of rotation 9, the sky opened again. But this time, only one pod descended, larger than the others, burning brighter as it fell. It landed in the center of the forest, in a clearing that had marked as a safe zone on his mental map. When the smoke cleared, he saw what had been released. The owl was a nightmare made flesh. It was 12 meters long, with a body like a serpent wrapped in armor plates, and a head that seemed to be nothing but teeth and eyes. It moved through the forest like liquid death, its massive form crushing trees and stones with equal ease. The ground shook with each step it took. Watched it from a distance, hidden in the branches of a tall tree with crouched beside him. His heart was pounding, but his mind was calm, already analyzing, already planning. "That's it," he whispered. "That's their final weapon." The owl paused and raised its head, testing the air with a forked tongue as long as arm. It was hunting him, following his scent, tracking the trail he had left across the forest over the past 9 rotations. It would find him eventually. There was nowhere to hide from something that size. But wasn't planning to hide. He had spent his whole life preparing for moments like this. Not this exact moment, not this exact creature, but moments where death seemed certain and survival seemed impossible. He had learned that in those moments, the only way forward was through. You couldn't run from death. You had to face it. "Okay," he said let's get to work. The next 2 days were the hardest of his life. He worked without rest, building the largest trap he had ever constructed. He chose a canyon on the edge of his territory, a narrow passage between 2 cliff faces where the owl's size would work against it. He rigged the walls with deadfalls, massive boulders balanced on the edge of collapse. He set snares and pitfalls along the canyon floor. He gathered every drop of venom he had collected and crystallized it on the tip of his largest spear. Helped where it could, carrying materials, standing guard, warning him when other predators approached. They worked together like they had been partners for years instead of days. When it was done, stood at the entrance of the canyon and looked at what he had created. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't sophisticated. It was brutal and dangerous and would probably get him killed. But it was his best chance. He found the owl on the morning of the final rotation. It had been circling closer to his territory, following his scent, taking its time. It knew it had won. It knew there was nowhere he could run. Stepped out of the trees and into its path. The creature stopped, its many eyes focusing on him. It was even larger up close, a mountain of scales and muscle and teeth. Its breath washed over him, hot and foul, carrying the smell of everything it had ever killed. "Hey," said, "you're looking for me." The owl lunged. Ran. He sprinted through the forest faster than he had ever run in his life, ducking under branches, leaping over roots, his lungs burning and his legs screaming. Behind him, the owl crashed through everything in its path, destroying trees like they were made of paper, gaining ground with every second. Ran beside him, matching his pace, its 6 legs churning the earth. They had practiced this, planned this, worked out every step of the chase. The canyon was half a kilometer ahead. They just had to make it. The owl's jaws snapped closed a meter behind him. He felt the rush of displaced air, smelled the creature's breath on his neck. Close, too close. "Now," he shouted. The peeled away, veering left into the undergrowth. The owl's attention shifted for just a moment, confused by the second target. That moment was all needed. He reached the canyon entrance and kept running, his feet pounding the rocky ground, his arms pumping at his sides. Behind him, the owl followed, its massive body scraping against the canyon walls as it forced itself through the narrow passage. The first deadfall triggered when the creature was 20 meters in. A boulder the size of a car dropped from above, smashing into the owl's back. The creature roared, a sound so loud it made its ears ring, but it kept coming. The second deadfall hit it in the head. The third caught its tail. The owl was slowing, stunned by the repeated impacts, but it wasn't stopping. It was still coming, still hunting, still determined to kill. Reached the end of the canyon where the walls opened up into a small clearing. He stopped and turned, watching the owl approach. Blood ran from a dozen wounds on its body. One of its eyes was closed, damaged by falling rock. But it was still alive, still dangerous. "Come on," whispered, "just a little further." The owl lunged again and triggered the final trap. The canyon floor collapsed. The creature's own weight had weakened it just as had planned. The owl fell, its massive body plunging into the pit he had dug and covered with branches and leaves. More boulders fell from above, pinning the creature in place, burying it under tons of stone. But it wasn't dead. Could see it moving, struggling, its armored body slowly pushing aside the rocks. It would free itself eventually. He had minutes, maybe less. He picked up his spear, the one tipped with crystallized venom, and approached the pit. The owl's remaining eye found him. There was something in that eye, something that might have been hatred or might have been respect. The creature knew what was about to happen. It had been engineered to be unkillable, the ultimate predator, the final solution to any problem. And now it was about to die at the hands of a soft, clawless, venomless human. "I'm sorry," said quietly. "You're just doing what you were made to do. I understand that." He raised his spear. The killing blow took 7 hours. The owl's armor was thick, its vitals were deep, and had to strike again and again, finding gaps in the scales, driving the poisoned spear deeper with each thrust. The creature fought back when it could, snapping its jaws, thrashing its tail, but trapped as it was, it could not reach him. Near the end, when the venom had finally taken hold and the creature's struggles were weakening, appeared at the edge of the pit. The looked down at the dying owl, then at, and made a soft clicking sound. "Yeah," said, exhausted beyond words, "we did it." The owl died as the sun set on the final rotation, climbed out of the pit and collapsed on the canyon floor, too tired to move, too tired to think. Curled up beside him, and together they slept. In the orbital station, silence reigned. The council members stared at the screens, at the human lying beside his companion, at the corpse of their ultimate weapon cooling in the pit below. "The test is complete," they announced into the silence. "The human has survived 10 rotations. According to the rules established 10,000 years ago, his species has passed the predator test." No one argued, no one could. "Furthermore," they continued, "I move to retire the predator test permanently, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" a council member asked, though the question was hollow, already knowing the answer. "On the grounds that we have been asking the wrong question for 10,000 years. They gestured at the screen, at the sleeping human who had done what no one believed possible. "We designed the test to answer, can this species survive? But that was never the right question. The right question is, what happens when this species decides to fight back?" The council voted. The decision was unanimous. 1 month later, returned to Earth. He stepped off the transport ship in Seoul, blinking in the bright sunlight, looking out at the crowd that had gathered to welcome him home. Walked beside him, the first alien creature to receive permanent residency on Earth, looking around at this new world with curious eyes. The reporters shouted questions. The cameras flashed. Politicians pushed forward to shake his hand, to be photographed with the man who had won humanity's place in the galaxy. Ignored all of them. He walked through the crowd to where his grandmother stood, a tiny old woman with steel in her eyes and tears on her cheeks. He hugged her gently, careful of her fragile bones, and whispered in her ear, "I stayed human, grandmother, just like you taught me." Years later, when a Dominion historian asked him about his time on Seven, would shrug and say something that became the most quoted line in galactic academic literature for the next century. "I wasn't special," he said. "Any human could have done what I did. We've been fighting to survive for 200,000 years. We just got very good at it." The historian published this quote, and across the galaxy, other species read it with wonder and fear. They had claws and venom and armor. They had engineered weapons and ancient technologies. Humans had something else, something that couldn't be manufactured or evolved. Humans had persistence, the stubborn refusal to die, the absolute certainty that no matter what the universe threw at them, they would find a way to survive. And if survival required them to turn the hunt against their hunters, well, they had been doing that for 200,000 years. They were very, very good at it.